Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Commissioner. Thanks for being here. Delay.
You're doing both parts now?
Thank you.
Can you ask all the press questions too later on? That would be good.
I don't know if they're going to let me.
No?
I'm just going to speak for a couple minutes and then turn it over to Mayor de Blasio, and you'll hear, as usual, from Dermot Shea, our Chief of Crime Control Strategies, then Chief of Detectives Bob Boyce, and also from Jesse Tisch. Jess will give you an update on Spot Shotter. So it's no secret that month after month, quarter after quarter, the NYPD has continually pushed crime down further and further. A great deal of that credit goes to the hardworking men and women who put that uniform on each and every day and go out and do what we as a society have asked them to do, what they swore an oath to do, and that's to fight crime and to keep people safe. I'm talking about dedicated officers who rush to the aid of domestic violence victims, brave cops who take guns off career criminals in the middle of the night while the rest of New York City is sleeping. I'm talking about devoted public servants, like murdered detective Mia Sotis Familia of the 4-6 precinct up in the Bronx, and Officer Dal Shvave of the 6-7 precinct in Brooklyn, who still has a lengthy recovery ahead of him after being dragged by a car in June. And I'm talking about cops like James McNaughton, who 12 years ago, yesterday, became the first NYPD officer killed in action in Iraq. Jimmy joined the Army in 1996 and was honorably discharged 5 years later in the summer of 2001. He immediately re-enlisted in the reserves and joined the NYPD the very next day. Jimmy was deployed to Iraq in 2004, and then on August 2nd, 2005, while training Iraqi police up in a guard tower, Jimmy was struck and killed by a sniper's bullet. At just 27 years old, Jimmy gave more to this city and to this nation than any of us will ever. And his service to this police department was in his blood, with both parents and his fiancée serving the NYPD too. Spoke to his dad, Bill, last night. We miss him like we miss all our heroes, and we'll always honor their memories. One of the best ways to honor our fallen officers is to maintain a sharp focus on our crime-fighting mission. We're doing that quite effectively through precision policing and directed enforcement aimed at gang activity. And we're working with our local, state, and federal law enforcement partners to see cases through to meaningful prison sentences for those who carry or use illegal firearms in our city. Earlier this week, on Tuesday, I was really pleased to see the crowds that turned out for National Night Out. The NYPD held events at about 70 locations this year. I got to a few of them in all 5 boroughs. I do have to tell you, I've been a cop a long time, and every year I see more and more people at this event. It's very, very encouraging, and it speaks to our whole neighborhood policing philosophy. I really would like to see these kinds of interactions I witnessed this week take place in the city every day in all of our neighborhoods, and we're starting to. When I began my remarks, I said that much of the credit for our consistent reduction in crime is owed to the men and women in blue, and it is the cops who are working now, and for all those who came before them, that got us to where we are now. But as time goes on, we increasingly need to work with we have to have those strong relationships we're developing between our cops and everybody who lives and works in all our communities. They're the ones who know the criminals. They're the ones that know who's on their streets, on their block, in their housing developments, and in their neighborhoods. No one knows better than what's going on in their block than the people that live and work there. And they're the ones who can help us maintain our focus, maintain our efforts, maintain where we're going to put our resources in the right areas. So we need that connection between New Yorkers and our officers. We need everybody's help because public safety will always be a shared responsibility. That's how we're going to keep finding our way forward together. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And Commissioner, congratulations to you and all the leadership of the NYPD present here, and most importantly, the men and women of the NYPD for another month of extraordinary progress. And I just want to say at the outset, we're now 7 months completed in the year 2017, and something very special is happening this year. And I want to fully credit it to the changes that have been made as a result of the neighborhood policing strategy. And I want to give the Commissioner in particular credit for developing this strategy and bringing it to life. More and more we see what it means. So 7 months in to 2017, we know we have now the safest year on record. And we see it consistently across crime categories. We've talked a lot before, and I like to repeat it because it's true. New York City is the safest big city in America. But the question people always ask is, how far can you go? What we've seen so far in the months of this year, January through July, is just extraordinary consistency in the progress that the NYPD is making. So records continue to be set, and we see so far this year really steady and continued progress. Major crime down 8.1% from last July, and it's dropped in all 5 boroughs. And we also have seen the lowest number of shootings ever for the month of July, dropped from 97 last year to just 80 citywide in the month of July 2017. Everyone here knows that the assumption that everyone holds is in the summer months, unfortunately, we see an uptick in violence. But even though that's always a challenge, this year NYPD has done something already amazing, showing that in the month of July there could be extraordinary efforts made to reduce the number of shootings. And a lot of us here if we had heard in years past the notion of 80 shootings in all of New York City in the month of July, any July, we would have been astounded. But this is becoming something we're getting more and more used to, and that's a good thing. The overall progress this year, so far, year to date, murders down 17.3%, shootings down 17.1% year to date compared to last year. Also, extraordinary progress. Why does neighborhood policing make the difference? Because it simply creates an alliance between police and community we didn't have enough of in the past. It's the point the commissioner made. More and more people come to National Night Out because more and more people feel deeply connected to our police. They know them by name because of neighborhood policing, because of the presence of the NCO officers. And I ask NCO officers all the time when I meet them, I ask them spontaneously, describe what it's like, what's different. 2 things consistently come up. They talk about the fact that they get thanked by community members a lot, and people who know them, come to know them, thank them for their work on a regular basis, and that's what our officers deserve. But the other thing they say is about the flow of information. I ask NCOs all the time, have you gotten information from people in the community? Is it different from what you used to get before? What kind of information? What has it led to? And what I consistently hear is more information, better information, leading to more ability to stop crime. That's the kind of thing we all hoped for in neighborhood policing, and we now see it coming to pass. The fact is, this also connects to the other big strands, the other big changes. Obviously, the training that our police force has received focuses on building those relationships, focuses on de-escalation in moments of tension and conflict. All of that helps in the process of opening up communication with communities as well. And the change that's going on within our police force. A lot of you, I think, noted, as I did, the reporting recently on the fact that now we have a police force that over 50% of its members live in the 5 boroughs. Now, I don't know when that was last true. I don't know how far back you have to go in our history. But I think it's a very healthy thing for New York City that now more than half of our officers live in the 5 boroughs. From everything I can see, that trend is going to deepen. And it's a good thing for people to come from the communities, the broader communities they serve, know this city the way someone who grows up here does. And it gives faith to communities to see members of their own communities make it to the NYPD. Certainly, I said this the other night, National Night Out in the 4-6 precinct, no one epitomizes that new NYPD more than the hero we lost, Detective Familia, literally from very nearby from the community of the 4-6 precinct and serving in her own community. I think that's the shape of things to come with New York City and the NYPD. In the end, these strategies are working, but I'll conclude this one point in English and say a few words very quickly in Spanish. I want to emphasize there is no complacency. No one up here at this table is feeling any complacency whatsoever. And I really admire that about the NYPD leadership. There is an urgency every time we talk about any strategic issue, anytime we talk about these statistics, no one is ready to say we've gone as far as we can go or we've done what we can do. Everyone's looking to take the next big step. And I admire that approach and that attitude, and it's a part of why this team has achieved so much. So my congratulations to you, Commissioner, and to your whole team. A few words in Spanish. El mes pasado tuvimos el menor número de crímenes para un mes de julio y una reducción general en los 5 condados. Logramos estas cifras gracias al histórico respeto mutuo y confianza entre la policía y nuestras comunidades. Seguimos trabajando cada día por una mayor confianza para que Nueva York siga siendo la ciudad grande más segura del país. Thank you very much. I think we're turning to Dermot Shea. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. You'll see some slides coming up behind me. Big picture of New York City crime as we're entering now August. Through 7 months, we're on pace. And Commissioner, I didn't want to say this, but it's already been in print, so I'm not letting the cat out of the bag. We are on pace to finish the year potentially under 100,000 index crimes, and that would be the first time that that's occurred. Through the end of July, we are at 54,000 and change index crimes. We finished last year, 2016, at a little over 102,000. We are currently 3,000 crimes fewer than last year. So that is a lofty goal and something that we're watching closely as we approach the end of the year. Every borough, as the mayor said, every borough of New York City is down in crime at this point in the year. And very important, every category of index crime, from murder to property crimes, is down. So we're seeing a wide stretch across a breadth of categories of crime, all down, trending. And you can see that in that slide. As you go to the next slide, you talk specifically about murder levels, and this is recorded murders. And these are preliminary numbers, I will say, because I can tell you definitively that the July number is already going to, unfortunately, be added to as crimes and investigations, which are fluid as paperwork is consolidated. But as of July 31st, as you see on that slide, when you look at the 10-year average of where we historically are and where we are through July 31st, 162 murders recorded. That comes to a 17% reduction in murders. Very significant. What's driving it? It's very clear. The gun strategy that we put in place over the last couple of years, combined with the investigative model, is really paying dividends. We are down 26 shooting homicides through July 31st. All right, very significant. And you can see for the last 4 years prior to this year, when you look at the end of the year, we've been in a range of 333 homicides to a high, I believe it was 352. We are on pace over 30 homicides below that right now. So that's a significant departure as you look at that slide. As you move on to shooting incidents, when you look at shooting incidents through July 31st, we are currently at 440 shooting incidents. Again, that's essentially the last decade that you're looking up on that slide, a 10-year look in New York City. Obviously, if you went back further, the numbers would go much higher. Pay attention to 2017, 16, and 15, and that dramatic drop the last 3 years. Again, as the momentum continues and our strategies really take hold here in New York City. 91 shooting incidents down through the first 7 months. More importantly, 112 fewer shooting victims in New York City. Again, a 17% reduction. If you recall, at the end of last year, we came in under 1,000 shooting incidents. We finished the year at 997, and that was the first time we were under 1,000. My expectation is we are going to shatter that record this year. We are 91 shootings down now. You'll see as we move through the slides, stay here for a minute, that July is historically the largest shooting incident number in New York City. We have potential this year to knock a significant number off with our current momentum continuing. So more good news. If you slide to the next slide, please. July specific now crime stats. Overall crime, as the mayor mentioned, trending down. 7 months of this year, 6 of the 7 months, we've been down in crime. We were up slightly in January, and then we've really taken off in pushing that number down. Again, the summary, Down in crime, 8% in July. About 3,000 crimes down this year. And overall, year to date right now, we're at about a 6% decline. And again, that 100,000 number is within reach for the first time. When you look at the next slide, July specific now, July murders. This is the one that is in the opposite direction that we'd like to see. So when you look at recorded murders in July, we are +1 from last year. And we've been in a narrow range the last 4 years, but you can see it's 1 or 2 additional each year. What's behind that? We see normal fluctuations, quite frankly, like that, unfortunately. But the big picture for the first 7 months, over 30 homicides down and approaching record numbers. 335 recorded homicides in New York City last year. At this point, we're on pace to be somewhere around 300, which would be a significant decline. If you go to the last slide, and this is July-specific shooting incidents in New York City. And I think this is some of what the mayor was referencing. July, historically, since we began recording shooting incidents in New York City, the #1 month of the year where we record the most has been July. This is the second straight July with under 100 shooting incidents. If you look back just 5 years to 2012, 188 shooting incidents in July. We finished this July with 80. Last August, we had 145 incidents. We are going to shatter that this August, and we are going to push that number even lower as we move through the final weeks of August. Why? Again, it's been alluded to, but you talk about Terry Monahan and the new model of policing in New York City. You talk next to me with Bob Boyce and the investigative model. There is still a momentum as we continue to fight crime and look for opportunities. And Mr. Mayor, you alluded to the lack of complacency. You should have seen the ComStat meeting tonight, and you would be proud of the men and women of the different bureaus of the NYPD continuing to look for ways to push the crime further down. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you.
All right, next up, Bob Boyce has a few cases he wants to talk about. Bob?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to announce the identification of 2 perpetrators from a double homicide that have happened about 3 weeks ago. They're to my left and to your right. This homicide happened in the 8-1 precinct. 2 young ladies, China Battle, 21 years old, and Shaquanda Staley, she's 29 years old. They were sitting in the rear of 740 Gates Avenue, which is the Stuyvesant Gardens area of Brooklyn. And they were sitting in the back having a barbecue with other individuals when several males entered that location. We've identified 2 individuals, Nazir Sanders, a.k.a. Nazi, and Anthony Alexander. Both are from nearby Roosevelt houses. They went back there, and we believe Mr. Sanders had a .45 caliber handgun. He fired 6 times. Mr. Alexander had a .380 caliber. He fired twice. These bullets hit these two young ladies. What he was shooting at was someone sitting with them. Okay, so we've identified these individuals. We're looking to identify 2 others that they were with. Now, when you go through here, initially a nickname emerged almost that night of a male named Stinky. Stinky was Nazir Sanders, as we find out, and most people knew him from the neighborhood. We went with that, and that's how we were able to identify Anthony Alexander. A lot of digital evidence, a lot of community input was able to get these 2 individuals identified. Again, we believe they were walking with 2 others. We're still seeking to build a case upon them. So it's not over, but we've been hunting these 2 individuals the last 2 days. Any community help that we can get as to where they are, we would certainly appreciate. To my right, substantial arrest that happened yesterday, and we're continuing to go forward with it. We had a couple years ago, actually 6 years ago, we had an incident in Forest Park in Queens. It was a Forest Park stranger rape pattern. A total of 6 incidents that started in March of 2011 and ended in August of 2013. We were able to get DNA from 2 of those cases. We have a DNA match this past week. However, I will tell you that we've been working this case straight since 2013, since its inception, so we never really lost sight of it. We got a DNA match from an arrest in Nassau County. This male's name is Mark Andrade. He lives in the area, in the 102 precinct in Richmond Hills. However, most of his arrests, he's got 6 prior arrests. He's a 45-year-old male, none of them which are for sex crimes. none of which would raise to the, prior to the recent arrest in Nassau County of grand larceny, would rise where his DNA would go into the CODIS database. It did finally, and we were able to make that identification. Now, right now, we're just charging him with the one that happened on March 29th of 2013. That's where we got his DNA. The young lady, all these young ladies were joggers on the bridle path within the park. This one young lady struggled with him and actually pulled a beer can out of his back pocket, a beer bottle, I should say, and then threw it. We retrieved that beer bottle as part of the crime scene. That's where we swabbed and got the DNA, and that's how I identified him. So again, we have a young lady who helped us identify her attacker. So right now he's being charged with that. We hope to add on more as we go forward. We've charged him already. We're going to bring him down to central booking about an hour or so out of the 104 precinct. So good things happening. That's all I have.
All right, thanks, Bob. Jess Tisch, our Deputy Commissioner of Information Technology, is going to give you an update on ShotSpotter. Jess?
Good morning. So it's been about a year since I've had the opportunity to update you all on what's going on with our ShotSpotter program. And in that year, a lot has happened. Just to remind everyone, ShotSpotter is a system of audio sensors, largely deployed on building rooftops and sometimes on street poles, designed to detect gunshots. And when the sensor detects the sound of a gunshot, it will send a real-time alert to officers policing in the area. The officers not only get alerted to the gunshot, but they can actually hear the sound of the gunfire on their smartphones and get information about where those shots were fired to like the specific address. ShotSpotter has been an incredible tool for the NYPD. It's contributed to faster response times to 911 calls or to incidents of shots fired. We've taken a lot of firearms off the street because of it. We credit it for a number of our gun arrests. We've also heard from our detectives that it is an incredible investigative tool. And also, one big point to make about ShotSpotter is we know about more shots fired incidents in the city because of ShotSpotter. So we found that only 16% of shots fired incidents have 911 calls associated with them. So let me tell you where we are in terms of our deployment. So today I'm very pleased to tell you that we have 54 square miles of the city covered by ShotSpotter sensors. And by the end of this summer, we will have 60 square miles of coverage. To give you a sense of how far we've come, in the past year alone, we've doubled our ShotSpotter coverage zone. We did 30 square miles in the past 12 months. The most recent precincts that we added are the 6-0 in Coney Island and the 120 neighborhoods, St. George, West Brighton, Clifton. The map behind me shows the current coverage of ShotSpotter areas in yellow. The 6 additional square miles that we plan to light up this summer are in orange. Those are Washington Heights in the 3-3 and Fort Greene in the 8-8. I'm also pleased to tell you that the mayor has recently provided funding to the NYPD to expand our ShotSpotter program for an additional 9 square miles of coverage, which will include Staten Island in the area of the 121, parts of Queens North, and also parts of the Bronx. And we anticipate those 9 additional square miles to be built out by the end of the calendar year. Quickly, because I know you always ask, some statistics of note. So year to date, we've had 1,740 ShotSpotter activations. Last year, in 2016, the full calendar year, just to give you some reference, we had 2,399. So that shows really the impact of our expanded coverage area. The activations that have 911 calls associated with them, as I was saying before, is just 16%. We've had 31 firearm recoveries so far this year. That's just when the police respond and in the initial response recover a firearm. Those don't count the firearms recovered based on later follow-up and investigation. And we've made 61 arrests associated with ShotSpotter alerts. The vast majority of these guns that are recovered and the arrests that are made to ShotSpotter activations that don't have 911 calls associated with them. I'll conclude with one quick recent example of a ShotSpotter success that is actually from this weekend in the confines of the 6-9 precinct. On July 29th at approximately 05:57 hours, police responded to a ShotSpotter activation at 633 East 86th Street. Upon arrival, the officers observed a suspect leaving the scene and placed him into custody. A search of the immediate area revealed 11 shell casings on the ground at the entrance to the home. In addition, a black .40 caliber firearm was found near the door. A subsequent search of the residence discovered 2 additional firearms. And again, in this incident, there were no 911 calls associated with the ShotSpotter activation.
All right, thanks, Jess. If you have any questions about crime or any of the cases Bob spoke about or ShotSpotter, we'll take those now. Yep.
Regarding the 84% of the ShotSpotter activations where there's no 911 call, what are people doing? Are people just shooting guns in the air? Anybody being hurt in those? Are they robberies that are just not reported? Is there any sense of what's happening?
Dermot will take that one.
And this is a generalization, so difficult, but what we see is what we've been attacking the last 3 years. We see small groups of individuals attached to crews or gangs in various parts of the city, concentrated and disputing with each other. And when they do, there are shots. Sometimes there are multiple guns, sometimes going both ways. But those are the types of incidents, if I was going to generalize, that we see most often. It's not during the commission of a robbery. It's during where gangs disputing.
And here's the benefit on the investigative side on that. So you have one shooting where you have someone shot, and you have a ballistics hit on 2 other locations. So you don't always get the evidence you need on the police shooting or the individual shot, but we go over to the other incidents, and we're sometimes able to make identification from those shots fired jobs. It's been a tremendous bonus for us in the Detective Bureau, and it's helped quite a bit as far as we get brass, or what we call brass, shell casings from these locations, and we do ballistic hit, and we're able to identify people that way once they're arrested for that gun. So it's been a great bonus for us in the Detective Bureau that we did not think we were going to get a couple of years ago.
By the shooting incidents data, the release that we were provided, if I'm reading it right, says there were 102 shooting incidents in July 2017 compared to 119 in July 2016. You told us 80. And in addition, if ShotSpotter is identifying more and more shooting incidents, then how come the number's going down?
Yep. I'll address the first one. I'm not sure what you're holding in front of you, but 80
Release that says what I just read to you.
80 shooting incidents? No, I'm not sure what numbers. I can clarify that afterwards, but definitively, July, yes. If that's what that says, then it's incorrect. July of 17, which we just finished, 80 shooting incidents.
If ShotSpotter is identifying significantly greater numbers of shooting incidents, why are the shooting incidents that you're reporting to us going down?
Yep.
It's not significantly, the number's not significantly higher. This is something we haven't done in the past. These are shots fired that we haven't picked up in the past, and now we're starting to tally them also. And in these cases, people aren't being shot. It's just shots being fired.
So for definition purposes, a shooting incident, we require somebody to be shot. In addition to that, there are incidents that are occurring where shots are being fired and no one is hit. And as Bob said, all of this is pulled together, and we do nothing without prioritizing. And it has helped us on the investigative side and also the deployment side, quite frankly, on the patrol side, to put the cops where we need them to prevent shootings before they happen. So there's a lot going on and coming together, and that's why you see that dramatic drop in shooting incidents. And I apologize wherever you got the wrong information from.
Yep.
Reverend Shea, you mentioned the initiative against gang shootings and prosecution of federal authorities and others. Are you seeing with the federal people taking these cases that mere threat that they're going to be involved or when they arrest somebody that you get more cooperation with the defendants, cheerful another time?
Tony, it's difficult to quantify that, but that's not an outrageous statement. I will say that we get a great deal of cooperation from our local prosecutors as well as our federal, but the very nature of our deployment is based on the facts of each individual case, whether it's a gun case, a drug case, what charges we're attempting to prove, what we can prove. We'll make strategic decisions, and we do it on a daily basis of where we're going to prosecute individual cases. That's going to have the greatest impact for the quality of life of everyone in New York City. Once we make those, and we do cases, many, state and federal, and successful in both, difficult to quantify. Do you get more cooperation on a federal level? But there are certain strategic advantages to taking cases federal. Every case cannot go federal for a number of reasons. But there are advantages at times, admissibility of evidence, sentencing, and then depending on the circumstances, sometimes the sentencing is better, in fact, at a state level. So it's each case is case-specific, charges, who the individuals are. And I just want to get out there. It's we could not do this without Southern District of New York, Eastern District of New York, all our partners on the federal side, but also the vast majority of the cases we do are at the state level in the 5 counties in New York.
Hey, Tony, just to add to that, and when we do go federal, most of the time it's a discussion between the local prosecutors, us, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Yeah.
Question specifically about assaults. According to a report I have here from the city's health department, according to hospital records, there are about 22,000 assaults in New York City hospitals and health centers each year. Also, it's the 10th leading cause of emergency room costs. So how come your numbers for assaults are so low?
Dermot, you want to?
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to my mind there, and again, you would need to be a data junkie, as I am, and dig into those numbers. I would need to see it and see what you're describing. But Bob Boyce could be assaulted tonight and make a police report and go to the hospital, and he could go back to the hospital 5 times for that same injury. Is that 5 incidents that is being reported 5 separate times? You really have to look into the individual statistics and then go from there. That's a wide discrepancy. I'll give you some assault numbers here. We have about 11,500 felony assaults, many more misdemeanor assaults year to date, 24,000. So you didn't specify felony versus misdemeanor. So there's really a lot that could explain those numbers.
Ozzie?
2 questions. One, if the relationship between police and community is improving, why aren't more people calling in shots that they hear? And then secondly, the Brooklyn DA and State Attorney General earlier this morning said ICE raids in courts are leading some people to be fearful of cooperating with law enforcement out of fear of being deported. I'm wondering if you're seeing any of that in the NYPD.
Can I just jump in before others respond to the specifics? Look, we have many measures of why neighborhood policing is working, and obviously the most important set of measures is what we just described, the reduction in crime. But another thing to focus on is the reduction in complaints against police. So what I'd say to you is I understand I understand the sort of logic jump you make if people are feeling better about the relationship with the police, why don't they call in the shootings? I would argue that's not the best way to measure the relationship between police and community. I think it is whether our efforts are reducing crime. I think it's looking at how people respond to their interactions with police and the fact that they find, I think someone can help me on this, I believe the number is about a 15-year low in terms of the number of complaints that are going to CCRB. And certainly all the information we're hearing from community leaders and active citizens about their relationship with the police, I think that's its own set of data, and that tells us a lot. Should every New Yorker call in a shot if they hear it? Absolutely, because the police need that information, and not everywhere is yet covered by ShotSpotter. But Ozzy, I would really argue that is a different question than whether people feel good about the relationship with police. That may be people who, have heard shots over the years and unfortunately gotten used to it. We would like to encourage people, of course, to believe that there's constant progress. They should take nothing for granted. They should assume we're not taking anything for granted and call that in right away.
Just moving forward with the technology that we have now, maybe that's something we can take a look at to see if we can close that gap between the number of 911 calls and the number of ShotSpotter alerts.
And the cooperation with crime victims or witnesses, are you getting any kind of sense that people are being scared away by ICE showing up at court?
From all the community outreach we do across the city, we're not getting that sense in New York City. Graham?
Chief Boyce, are there any updates to the mail boxes mailed to the government? And also, have you found the doctor who was responsible for the death of plastic surgery?
Okay. The first one is that we were able to narrow our focus on the 105 investigation quite a bit. It is, when I said it earlier, it is certainly not the victim of this, Mr. Ray. He is not the target here, nor is the person who was named in the press as the gang member who lived inside. So we have narrowed our focus substantially. We're trying to keep our case fairly confidential right now. We feel like we're making a lot of progress in a short amount of time, so we're moving forward in that direction. Insofar as the case you spoke about the botched plastic surgery, working with the Manhattan DA right now, conciliating our evidence that we have. I said earlier we have a lot of people identified right now, and we have a lot of video that we're trying to pull in right now into the case. So we'll go forward with the Manhattan DA on that case. It's again, we've come a long way in a short amount of time. It's looking very good. There is no doctor. We don't believe him to be a doctor. All right. We believe he's identified as the man and woman who did that. So not to disparage any doctor in this world, he's not one of them. All right. So we'll go forward.
Tina?
Mayor, to get back to community policing, two police officers in Brooklyn were refused service at Dunkin' Donuts this weekend.
Say again,
Two police officers in Brooklyn were refused service at Dunkin' Donuts by terrorists and I don't serve cops. Michael leaders come out and he's saying this is because politicians are demonizing police officers in the city, and he's looking for motivation.
No, I think this is, I don't know the details, and I wasn't there, but if it's what you described, it's someone really being stupid and unfair to our police officers. And that you can't, someone at Dunkin' Donuts behind the counter can't refuse service to anyone. That's illegal to begin with. So that's unacceptable to me that anyone would do that. But I think the atmosphere in this city has been one of growing respect between police and community. There are so many ways, including National Night Out just a few days ago, that we honor our police officers and their service. And we also send a message to community members that they need to be allies with police. Police need to be allies with them. Everyone needs to be talking much more closely and consistently. That's what's pervading on the ground in this city. I've seen it now for 4 years, how it's grown. And as I said, when you look at something like a huge decrease in the number of complaints against police officers, I think that tells us a hell of a lot more than some jerk at a Dunkin' Donuts who wouldn't serve coffee.
Commissioner, could you talk about the police shooting in the 6-7 precinct? The officer involved did not receive critical incident training, and he had previously fired his weapon in a similar incident.
Right.
Protocols were followed, and you have thoughts about that?
This is under investigation by force investigation. As far as everything that we see right now, all protocols are followed. This incident happened very quickly. Officer Gonzalez did not receive CIT training. The three other police officers that he was with did. Right now, we've trained 5,653 police officers in CIT training. We're training about 105 a week. After the Danner incident up in the Bronx, we changed our focus to supervisors, lieutenants, and sergeants, NCOs, and sector cops, and we should be done with that training by the end of 2018.
Are you planning to increase the number of officers that you plan to train? Last year, you said you guys planned.
Yeah, we doubled the number of people we're training per week.
The total number, though, you guys planned to do 5,500 last year. You passed that.
We're planning on doing the whole patrol force.
Chief Boyce, there was some digging over the weekend in Santa Park, apparently for some MS-13 intelligence. There weren't any finds of any human remains. I'm wondering if that investigation is can you assess that intelligence information you got from the source?
We have. They turned out to be animal bones, pig bones, if you will. So someone saw someone buried something there, and that's when we went back and uncovered that. We sent it to the anthropologist, and he determined them to be animal bones. So that case continues. We're working with other police departments in Nassau, as well as Hempstead, on this specific set of MS-13, and it's going pretty well.
That's all.
Chief Boyce, is there any update, any new leads in regards to the Central Park explosion from last year? And do you see any possible connection, any similarities between the explosion in Queens and that explosion last year? And then just one more question. How much money has been spent thus far on ShotSpotter? And you mentioned the mayor's funding a new expansion.
It's becoming a 16-part question. Why don't we do the first one? We'll come to you. No, that was several in the end. We'll come to you on the second one. Let's do the first. The first again was?
The Central Park case.
There you go.
The Central Park case, right now, I will say it's a wholly different explosive. That was a high explosive in Central Park. The one in Queens was a low explosive. It was flash powder in Queens. That was something else in Central Park. That case is still ongoing. We have federal partners as well. I have nothing new to report to you about that, but I will say with perfect clarity, the two don't appear at this point to be related at all. Two different devices, two different means of explosive. So nothing new I can report to you about Central Park, and it's not related at all to the 105.
ShotSpotter. Go ahead.
I was asking about the funding, how much has been spent thus far, and with the new expansion, specifically the dollar amount for that.
So ShotSpotter is a subscription model, so you pay per zone, and each zone is 3 square miles. So we pay $225,000 per square mile per year. Per 3 square mile per year. So in a year for 60 square miles, it's $4.5 million.
Second row.
Commissioner, you and First Lady McRae held a press conference here earlier this year announcing you were going to be increasing the size of the vice squad and targeting more pimps and johns for arrest. Can you talk about how that initiative is going so far, and what are you doing sort of to ease concerns of victims?
Yeah, that's through Jimmy Klein. He's in our Vice Enforcement Division. He has a human trafficking section that he's using in there. I can get you updated numbers for him on how they're doing so far. And we refocused our efforts on the people running the prostitution operations and the people patronizing. And we're treating most of the people we lock up for prostitution as victims and trying to get them as much help as possible.
Question for Mr. Mayor, and then also a question for Chief Shea or Commissioner. Mr. Mayor, the incident at Dunkin' Donuts, I'm just curious, is that something that you knew about before it was just raised?
No, just heard it now.
But you felt comfortable?
I said I think I've made very clear in the beginning. I think you were here. I said I wasn't there. I don't know the details, but as described, if someone first of all, any person who's in food service and refuses someone service because of the uniform they're wearing or the color of their skin or the language they speak, that's immoral, that's illegal. And second, if they did it because they had some animus towards the police, I think that's absolutely unacceptable. So, and it's no right to make that judgment. If they don't want to serve people, go get another job, but don't take it out on police officers who are trying to protect people. But again, I wasn't there. Maybe there's more complex than that, but I'm responding to as it was described.
Not providing service. I just, very often you won't comment when you're not familiar with the situation, so I was just curious what made the difference.
Because it's so strong a violation to my point of view. I mean, first of all, I've rarely heard anything like that. I think the days of people not serving anybody because of who they are generally are past us. There's been some efforts in some states, as you know, to not provide service to people because they happen to be members of the LGBT community, things like that. But as a general rule in our society today, it's unacceptable to refuse service to anyone because of who they are. So that's what I'm responding to. I think it's pretty cut and dried. If it's anything like what was described, it's just plain unacceptable.
And for NYPD officials, the year-to-date stats on rape and other sexual offenses, do you have the sort of cumulative numbers there, and this is something that's being brought up a lot by Assemblymember Maliatakis, obviously in a political setting, but I'm just wondering what those numbers are and what sort of, if there's anything being done of late to address any increases in those numbers?
All right, Chief Shea can handle that, but just to your question about what had possibly transpired at Dunkin' Donuts, I mean, let's be real here. This is less than a month since the brutal homicide of Detective Miyasota's familiar. And I spoke about this at length at the eulogy. And we need to stop vilifying the police. Take a look at the crime numbers that we're presenting to you today, just the homicide and shooting numbers alone. You know, the men and women in this great police department do a lot of terrific work, so I think we need to be respected for that.
In terms of the overall rape number, through July 31st, we're down a little over 6% in rapes, 801 versus 854. And that's preliminary, but that's where we are. We've been down most of the year. To be fair, the sexual crimes, and we've spoken about this, and I've probably been asked at about half the press conferences, it's very challenging, and it's something that is tough to nail down in terms of the outreach that we are doing to try to get more reports. And that's not to make an excuse, but to be fair, over 3 years, we're up 5%. So we have been seeing a number of rapes reported. This year they're down, but in the last couple of years it has been up. And the misdemeanor sex crimes is actually up this year. And that's about a 9% increase. So it continues to be very high on our list of priorities. But I will tell you that, and I read them all, it is a very complicated. In this, for example, the misdemeanor sex crimes, a lot of it is family members and dealing with children and things of that type. So it's a very complicated crime. I can tell you it's near and dear to everyone in the NYPD's heart to do everything that we can to attack this problem. But there does remain work to be done.
Are there a couple things that you're doing? Can you just give us a few specifics? Like what does that look like?
Quite frankly, it's a long conversation. I will tell you that in cases of, it's a complicated issue, and that's an understatement, but my overall generalization here is that when there is a sexual crime in New York City, Bob's detectives know in very short order in most cases. Many times we know right from the start of the complaint, but then it's a process of the domestic side to it, getting together with the prosecutors, getting together sometimes with complainant victims that do not want to prosecute and go forward. So you have issues of increased reporting. I'm telling you that in most of the cases, we know exactly who the perpetrator are. These are not serial offenders. Although we do have some cases like that, and we give it the utmost priority. And trying to navigate that world and bring this case to a successful conclusion, aid the victim, get the victim, what's a successful outcome for the victim. These are topics that are going on all across the country in law enforcement and how to deal with these issues. Tough one to tackle.
Jonathan?
On terror, there have been numerous incidents in Europe and again in Australia in recent weeks. Have you noticed any change in the pace, nature of threat, and are there any new threats here that the public should be advised of?
I'll let Commissioner Miller talk about that. John?
We follow the increase in those incidents, particularly in Western Europe, very closely. John, as you know, we have foreign posts located in 14 different cities in the world where we try to keep that reporting very current. Every incident we look at for what we call the TTPs, the training, tactics, and procedures used by the terrorist groups to see, is there anything new? Is there anything different? Is there anything that we have to either adjust our deployment to here on the street, or our tactics, training, or equipment for our people? From time to time, there are things that cause small adjustments. I think you've been following the reporting out of Australia, the reporting out of Germany, the reporting out of London and Paris. We look at what's happening with the use of large vehicles, rented vehicles. We look at the use of chemicals, different different strains of explosives. We do this in great detail all the time.
Police questions? Maybe two more.
Okay, so this happened. Thanks for that question. This incident happened just before midnight on Tuesday night, August 1st. Two individuals, Mr. Glover, who we later identified through videotape, a large collection and a great job by Manhattan detectives on this, was walking from Grand Central Station across the street to his job on East 43rd Street. As he was walking by an individual who we later was identified as John Jolly, words were exchanged, and Mr. Glover continued to walk. As further words were exchanged, Mr. Glover turned around and began speaking at a certain distance to Mr. Jolly. Mr. Jolly then approached him about 15 feet away, walked up to him. It was at this point that Mr. Glover retrieved a knife out of his sleeve, out of his left sleeve, held in his hands, and then as the argument ensued after that, stabbed him twice in the chest, once below the sternum and once elsewhere on his chest. He then continued walking eastbound on 43rd Street. Mr. Jolly walked back up to Lexington. He did not seem to be affected by it at the time. We did notice from our video that he had a red spot on his shirt. He then walked north on Lexington and down East 44th Street, where he collapsed at the corner of East 44th Street and 3rd Avenue. He was rendered aid at that point by passersby, called 911, and he was removed to Bellevue Hospital, where he expired later on. We were able to put together this video package, this tracing of Mr. Glover all the way back down to where he worked on East 43rd Street, 2 blocks down. Went into a building. We went into the building with that video, and he was identified as Nathaniel Glover, a.k.a., and I say a.k.a., his moniker, his rap moniker, Kid Creole. We found out that he went in that night, and there was no work for him at that location. He then went home. We went to his where he lived in the Bronx in the 4-4 precinct, and we asked him to come back down to Manhattan South, which he did. Later on that night, he gave us a narrative where he admitted to this crime. He's now being charged with murder too, and that's kind of like what we have right now. I don't want to get into the specifics. That'll be for a grand jury. Mr. Vance has a grand jury coming up here, but he is charged with murder too. He has not been arraigned yet, so he's still in court.
Last up for police.
The question is about ShotSpotter and neighborhood policing. I'm wondering, ShotSpotter's been around for about 2 years now, and the police department has been accused of misleading the public by reporting shooting incidents, but not shots fired. I'm wondering where the conversation stands with reporting shots fired in the COPSEC report, and what the error, if all 2,300 of those incidents that you mentioned earlier, Commissioner Fish, are confirmed shootings or other incidents.
Can I just jump in for a second? Again, there's been a historical approach to how shootings are tabulated, which involves when there's a victim. ShotSpotter was something we chose to do to find where guns were fired that we were not finding otherwise, that were not being reported by community residents, or that didn't happen to be someplace where a police officer was there to see it or hear it. That was a decision to go and find more of the information we needed to seek out the problem, not turn away from it. And we've been very clear about collecting that information and explaining to the public what it means, and also what it's allowing our officers to do in terms of better crime fighting, better prosecutions, et cetera. So I just want to give it that frame before the experts speak, that in fact, one of the things I really appreciate about the discussion that led to the utilization of ShotSpotter was it was a decision to do something that involved having to do even more work to address more problems rather than turning away from them.
I would just add that from my perspective on the releasing of data and to the public, I'm not aware of any other police department that does release statistics. Not to say that it doesn't take place, but we're under requirements to release certain crime statistics. Some part of the country calls it Part 1. We call it index crimes. But in terms of shots fired, radio runs, or jobs, I'm not saying it's something we would never do. It's nothing that I've considered. And it's not something that I'm aware that any police department does do. And there's a lot of factors to that, too. When ShotSpotter goes off, we have protocols built into place with Bob's personnel, Terry's personnel, and trying to elicit information and recanvassing areas. But in terms of releasing statistics on how often jobs come in, there is an element to this, too, that not all of them are founded. So there are unfounded jobs. And I would just have to think through that. But right now, currently, there's no plans to do that.
Can you just, I'm sorry, Dermot, just to clarify, unfounded in some cases because another sound creates
Sure.
the,
So
that's part of the challenge here,
people
that
call
another
911
sound can make ShotSpotter go off, right?
People call 911 and say shots are being fired, and sometimes they are, and sometimes people mishear things. I was going to bring that up earlier when you say that 86% don't have a 911 call. Sometimes that's not for a distrust of the police. It's because people hear noises and they don't think it's shots. So that's an element to this, too. I can tell you that Jesse said, and it's a phenomenal tool, that officers can literally hear these shots now on their smartphones as well as their desktops. And when we roll out new procedures and start getting adherence to new policies, we want to make sure the tools are being utilized. So when we see jobs coming over ShotSpotter, I personally, and many in this room will listen to these jobs. Is it a shots fired job? What should we have done differently? So there is an element there, too, that not every time its audio is recorded is a shot. But I can tell you, I would echo 100%. It's been a phenomenal tool in probably ways that we didn't even anticipate in directing our resources, linking cases together, prioritizing cases, and on and on. It's been phenomenal.
Jess, you have something to add?
Sure. We know that 5% of our ShotSpotter activations, of the alerts we get from ShotSpotter, are definitely false positives. So either they're determined to be firecrackers going off or a car backfiring. That's a pretty low false positive rate, but I want to make that clear. Also, and Chief Boyce can tell you in much greater detail than I can, it's very difficult to find shell casings when you're doing a canvas. For our ShotSpotter activations, we have evidence recovery, shell casings and the like, in 12% of the activations. So I think that 12% number puts in context the 16% number associated with 911 calls.
The second part was about neighborhood policing. We've been talking about a survey for some time change now. I'm wondering where that stands, if the survey's been created.
Okay, the survey has been created. It's in beta now. It's still in testing. So this is going to be a great tool for our precinct commanders, and we're going to incorporate it into CompStat.
We're going to move off into other topics. Thank you.
Topics. Andrew.
Mayor, in 2015, you vowed that your administration would make sure that NYCHA sidewalk sheds and other scaffolding, if they weren't being used for active construction, they would come down. We've been all over the city, and we still see them at NYCHA complexes where work isn't being done. What do you think the disconnect is?
I appreciate the question a lot.
I appreciate the question a lot. There's two answers. Sometimes there's a reason the scaffolding is up that has nothing to do with a specific job that has to be done, but there's a threat, something that could fall and there needs to be scaffolding up immediately, even before you can get to work on the solution. But there are other cases, which we did talk about in 2015, where the job is done, the work is done, there's no longer a need for scaffolding. In those cases, the scaffolding needs to come down immediately. So I want to thank you for raising this, because I think you did locate some locations where that didn't happen. And it's unacceptable to me. I'm going to have a meeting very quickly with the leadership of NYCHA to make clear that that's unacceptable and this has to be acted on immediately. It's ridiculous if scaffolding has done everything it was supposed to do for it to be there in the middle of one of our public housing developments. It creates a lot of problems for the community, and I won't tolerate those scaffoldings being there. So I'll get back to you soon with a very specific timeline for when they'll come down. Please.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, yesterday you expressed some dissatisfaction, at least on Twitter, with the President's new proposal regarding changing how people are admitted to the country legally, legal immigration. There's like you seem to say that we shouldn't have tests for, proficiency of English or skilled workers. They say there's about 1 billion people in the world who would like to come to the United States. What kind of criteria do you think are appropriate for the country to decide who comes in? Or is this just something that it's really not up to the United States, it's up to the people who want to come?
Let me first tell you what I said, which is factual based on everything I've seen about what President Trump proposed. It literally would have excluded my grandparents and would have excluded probably the parents and grandparents of a lot of people in this room. My grandparents didn't speak English when they got here from Italy. My grandparents didn't have college degrees. They became exemplary Americans, and they contributed to the economy. They built a business. Their children were able to go to college, which no one previously ever dreamed of. That's the American dream. So the notion of that we only want to allow into America people who speak English and have advanced degrees violates the history, almost 400 years of our history of people coming here, including working class people, folks who didn't have education, folks who didn't have the benefit of knowing English already, and yet they built this country. In terms of what should be the idealized rules, I'm not an expert on the immigration process. I think it's fair to say for decades we've had a series of rules that work pretty well, meaning if you went through the legal process, which everyone should, folks came in from all over the world without bias, all different kinds of skill levels, contributed in lots of different ways. And so I would say there's been a pretty consistent consensus over the last decades that there is a way to set minimum standards, but also allow a range of people in. And I don't know why we wouldn't want to do that and keep making that work the right way and do the thing that, bluntly, the majority of Americans would like to see, comprehensive immigration reform that addresses the outstanding issues and provides a path to citizenship for folks in good standing. The 11 to 12 million people are here, so we can finally create some normalcy in this country rather than having this unending debate.
Quick follow-up. I know you don't like to deal with hypotheticals, but that's
I do not like to deal with hypotheticals. You are correct.
But you do understand that had your grandparents not come to the United States, we would still have a mayor.
I'd never said you wouldn't have a mayor. I'm sure you'd have a mayor. Just wouldn't be this mayor because I wouldn't be alive. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, public payroll data shows that engineers and mechanics with the Department of Corrections are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. In fact, many of them are making more in overtime than in their base salary.
Yeah.
Are you aware of that, and will anything be done to curb the overtime hours?
I am aware of it. Look, we work very hard to keep overtime as low as possible. It's been a major focus in the last few years with a number of agencies. The challenge at the Department of Corrections is an aging physical structure, particularly at Rikers Island, that needs constant work, including a lot of emergency work. That's where a lot of the overtime comes from. We don't obviously use overtime for non-emergency work. So the problem is really a physical one that we're trying to figure out ways to address that will ultimately bring down the need for overtime. So I don't take it lightly at all. I want to reduce overtime everywhere. But unfortunately, when it comes to the correction system, we have a structural problem that's standing in the way right now.
Did you find those numbers alarming?
Yeah, alarming, but I also understood that we have to get to the root cause, and we have to fix the fundamental physical reality. Yes.
Mayor, you tweeted this morning, or your campaign account tweeted this morning, that you'll debate before the primary election regardless of CFB requirements. It looks like Sal Albanese might meet the CFB requirements, and that you'd, of course, be required to participate in that kind of a debate. But, I mean, what are you envisioning with what you said this morning? Are you considering debating Bob Ganji, who probably won't meet those CFB requirements? Are you anticipating some kind of debate held outside the CFB?
This is simply a statement of principle, and the details have to be worked out by the campaign team. I don't have any idea who will qualify, but if anyone qualifies under the CFB system besides myself, we will certainly follow those rules happily. But I wanted to make clear that if no one qualified, I'd still be willing to have a debate, and we can work out, how that is put together.
And just sort of on the same topic right now, the CFB is holding a meeting where they're discussing whether or not to award you more than $2 million in matching funds. Why do you think that you need the matching funds in a race where you're not expected to be facing any primary opponent who will also qualify for it?
Look, first of all, we talked about this the other day. I don't believe there's any way to know what's going to happen in an election. I think those who believe they understand elections before they happen were rudely awakened on November 8th. And I don't take anything lightly. There's a set of rules. That's what I know. There's a set of rules. We have the best campaign finance system, I think, in the whole country. It makes very clear that people should pursue maximum small donations from New York City residents, and part of what is there to encourage that is the matching fund system. And if you meet a set of goals and metrics and the conditions exist, you have a right to a certain amount of matching funds. I think that's the way things should be, and we have clearly qualified, and I believe we need those resources to talk to people in this city about both what I've been doing, but more importantly, the vision for the future of the city they have to make a decision on. So the rules are clear as a bell from my point of view, and we have lived up to those rules. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, you initially attributed the termination of Ricardo Morales to a structural reorganization, and then later explained it in terms of performance issues. Can you explain your change in tact on that and why you did that?
I can say I think those two things go together. And I think the people who understand this best are the people involved in the decision. I'm not one of them. So the commissioner is Lizette Camillo. She reports to First Deputy Mayor Tony Shores. Those are the folks who can give you the details. But I think there was a performance issue, and there was a desire to also change the way the agency was structured. Those two things were simultaneous. I just think it's obvious they go together sometimes. Sometimes you want to go in a different direction with how you run an agency, and you're also clear about what you feel about the personnel you have. But again, I can't speak to the details because I wasn't involved.
Mr. Mayor, on that police shooting in Brooklyn, have you commented on that? Did I miss your comments?
I think you did miss my comments. Really? So, look, are you referring to... Yeah, it's a tragedy, obviously, and nothing any of us ever want to see. You know, a young man who obviously had very, very serious problems that were not, sufficiently addressed. Anybody who confronts police officers with a knife with no warning whatsoever, that's a horrible, horrible situation, and it suggests that there were some real serious issues that went untreated. But there's a full investigation going on to get to the details, and if we can look for a way forward, it is this continued training of our officers in terms of crisis intervention, how to deal with folks who are emotionally disturbed. But I think even more, it's the effort to create a real mental health system in this city through the Thrive NYC initiative to reach people in need as early as humanly possible so it never gets to a day like that one. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, just building off that, Councilman Jumani Williams has said a special task force should be implemented that looks at incidents involving emotionally disturbed people in the NYPD. Do you think something like that would be practical? Should a special task force be put in place?
I don't personally see the need for a specific task force because I think it's an area of tremendous concern right now, both at City Hall and at the NYPD, to continue to improve the NYPD's ability to address situations involving emotionally disturbed people. Now, I will remind you, the number of calls each year is staggering. Commissioner, can you remind me?
It's 150,000 a year.
150,000 a year. I think for most New Yorkers, if they understood that our police officers, who, remember, went into the field of policing, not mental health, but end up having to deal with such complicated situations, that's why the training is so important. But even more so, I would again say getting to the root causes is the most important thing. We want to bring that number way down. We want to see a situation where our officers do not have to handle anywhere near that number of cases because those individuals are identified early, including during their school years, which is the best time to find a problem, and they get treatment early. That's the whole vision of Thrive NYC. So I would say, given the intense concern at City Hall related to mental health and the focus the NYPD has put on it. The right ideas are in place. We now have to just continue to deepen our implementation of those ideas. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, a lot of transit experts are saying with all of the haggling over the subways, you know, what about the buses? You know, that's something where the city has a little more say, a little
Sure.
more control. Can you tell us what you're doing about, you know, bus availability, bus routes, et cetera?
Well, where we have the biggest impact is on select bus service. Just to be clear, I don't think as you talk about buses in general, our control is significantly different than with the subway system. But in the area of select bus service, for it to be achieved, it requires cooperation between the city and the state and the MTA, and obviously investment by the city on the capital elements of each route. That's something we think has been a real success story. So there are some times when things have been done the right way, and that's one of them. I think there's 4 more lines coming on this year in select bus service, and then we want to keep expanding. So it's a good news story. I put it in the same category as the other kinds of newer types of transportation that are being developed rapidly, the ferry system, light rail, and obviously the expansion of City Bike. All of these are going to be necessary to give people more options. But we're very committed to long-term growth on select bus service.
BQX, is that, I mean, that's a little ways off, obviously. Yes. Is that something that you still feel like is an especially important answer to the crisis?
Sure. I mean, you know, I think I'm remembering my numbers correctly, that corridor, about 400,000 people live in that corridor. I mean, that would be the size of a major American city right there. It's, as you know, the start is being talked as 2019 or 2020. A lot of those areas are underserved, including, I believe it's something like 40,000 residents of those communities who live in public housing. A lot of our biggest concentration of public housing, places like Red Hook and in parts of Western Queens. So yeah, I think it's a big part of the equation. We said from the very beginning, if that one works, which we really hope it will and believe it will, it could be a model for expanding light rail in other parts of the city that are underserved by the subway system. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, there is a competitive council race coming up in Borough Park. The son of Dov Hyken has jumped in the race. You're very familiar with that borough,
Sure.
with that district rather.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the politics of the area?
How much time do you got? Okay. No, it's a situation that obviously that district is a district that neighbored the one I served in the city council. I know it very well. I know a lot of people in that district very well. But the situation, as you know, it's changed just in the last few days several times. So I really have not focused on it. At some point, I'll make a decision whether there's anything to say about it. But right now, I don't really have anything to say. But the broader analysis, there's a lot I could say, but again, not the time and place about the history of the district and all the work I've done with it, one thing or another. But it's such a new situation, we got to analyze it.
The situation you're referring to the race.
Obviously, the incumbent, without much, no one, I think, assumed he was going to leave the race. And then 2 new candidates emerging. That's a lot to digest, so we'll think about it. Yes?
On the question of the primary debate, you just said that it was a statement of principle for you to have a debate regardless of whether somebody qualifies or not. But about 2 weeks ago on New York One, you were asked about this, and you said that if nobody else meets the threshold under the CFP rules, quote, we'll cross that bridge at the time. The bridge crossing would seem to be August 11th, when the next filing period is for to qualify for the debate. So
yeah.
What changed between now and then?
I thought about it. No, I fully understand the question. I thought about it and talked to my team about it, and we just thought about, first of all, I think we all were working on the assumption that someone would qualify, and I'm surprised that that's not clear yet, but we don't know. But I just thought about it and said I would be more comfortable having a debate either way, and it just was a process of thinking it through and discussing it. So that's how I got to. When I say statement of principle, I'm not trying to say some big cosmic principle. I'm saying it was a decision to say, here's a marker I just want to lay down. Now I've come to the decision, I'll lay it down. I'm going to do a debate either way. It's simple as that.
Finally, you made that statement on the day that the CFP is meeting to statement of need for you to receive the full complement of matching funds. Are those two things related?
No, I think it's just about making very clear, because I've gotten a lot of inquiries from your colleagues on this question, and I come to a decision. It just didn't make sense to not say what I had decided. It just was very clear to me that I'm going to do a debate one way or another. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, does it concern you at all that a police officer who in 6'7", who had been involved in an EDP call and discharged his weapon, was again allowed to respond to another EDP call without receiving the...
I think we want to establish, I understand the question, but let's establish the facts first. So let me get that on the table, and then I'll respond.
The original shooting Officer Gonzalez was in. It didn't come over as an emotionally disturbed person's call. It did not come over as an emotionally disturbed person's call.
The previous shooting. So, again, there's an investigation going on of this incident. We all take that very seriously. We want to see what comes of that. And then we'll be able to say more when we see that. Was there one more? Yeah, Rich.
Senator Cory Booker thinks that marijuana ought to be legalized federally. I just wondered if you want to weigh in. And one of the effects, according to what he said, was that it could help to blunt the opioid.
Was that a play on words there, Rich?
Unintentional. True. Just wondered if you wanted to weigh in on that.
I'm not there. I think there's a major experiment happening in some states and some major American cities that's going to tell us a lot. But if you talk about the pros and cons, there are obviously some good arguments for legalization, but there's also a lot of unanswered questions, both about what it would mean for young people to have access to that drug, and also what it would mean in terms of public safety. So I'm not convinced that that's the right direction to go in yet, but it's something I'm willing to keep considering as we get more information from the places that have gone through it. Okay, thanks everyone.